Believe me, I don't want to scare or upset you, and I've been thinking all day whether to tell you or not, Mia said to her friend during a brief break when they were covering for the waitresses. I can see that something's been off from the start today, Alice asked. Well, you see, I went to a resort over the weekend. I told you about it, and I saw something rather unpleasant there, Mia continued. Alice nodded, encouraging her friend to go on, but Mia hesitated, unsure of how to break the news. You see, I saw your husband there, and not alone. I took a photo on my phone just in case. Look, Mia handed Alice her smartphone. Alice glanced at the screen and flinched nervously. Your husband Clark is hugging some girl. I'm sorry, I'm not telling you this to laugh at you, I'm not Stella. Just so you know for sure, because it's always better to have clarity. Right? Alice sighed. Actually, Mia hadn't revealed anything new. Alice had long suspected her husband was unfaithful. On top of that, the waitress from their restaurant had been dropping various hints. Alice had even asked Clark directly, but his denials were reluctant, as if he was brushing her off. It seemed he came and went as he pleased and talked to women on the phone almost in her presence. Well, Mia, why are you apologizing? It's not your fault. Besides, it's not really news, it's practically an open secret. And you know, after work, I'm going to file for divorce. Are you serious? You've really decided to do it? Well, you know, Alice, there's not much good in this, but it's probably better this way. Why drag it out when everyone already knows? So, yeah, it's going to end anyway, so might as well do it now. Take a break, Stella burst into the break room. Well, take a break for now, everything seems calm. Oh, Alice, look, isn't that your mother-in-law sitting at one of my tables by the window? Two ladies, all dressed up. Alice looked out into the dining area, and it seemed that what she saw did not please her. Alice left the room, leaving her friends alone. Did your mother-in-law really come here just to humiliate you again? Mia wondered. Stella? Apparently, this situation was more amusing to her, and she wanted to make a sarcastic remark about feeling like she was in a fairy tale. Cinderella had become, but not the kind of Cinderella they wanted. Alice was displeased that her mother-in-law, who could be considered a close relative, had shown up at the restaurant where she worked as a waitress. It felt like an additional humiliation to her. And what about the businesswoman with her money, influence, and well-settled son? Here she was, showing up like this. Indeed, Wendy was sitting at a table in person, dressed accordingly and possibly even having a business conversation with her equally elegant companion. She probably came with a friend to show off how unsuccessful her daughter-in-law was. Well, I'll soon free you from my unpleasant presence, she thought maliciously as she returned to the break room. You're right. Hey, Stella, how about I bring them the bill and serve my relative one last time, so to speak? Sure, go ahead, Stella agreed without argument. Alice quickly pulled out her marriage certificate and her divorce petition from her purse. Yes, she decided to inform Wendy of the impending change in her life this way. It might even come as a surprise to her. Alice herself didn't understand the policy her mother-in-law was following after learning that her golden boy intended to marry a waitress. Wendy was clearly opposed. She never said anything directly to Alice, but her looks were telling. Alice had even asked Clark, "Does your mom dislike me? It seems like she'd be happy to get rid of me." "Don't worry about it. All mothers-in-law are like that," Clark dismissed. "She would have used her love and whatever else if she had even tried to stop me from marrying a waitress. I wouldn't have listened." But just before the wedding, Wendy suddenly, if not exactly became kinder to the future daughter-in-law, at least started treating her more humanely, knowing there was nothing much to expect from Alice's family. Wendy took on all the expenses and organization of the celebration. And as for the outfit, that would be Wendy's gift to Alice, who initially thought that she and Clark would just have a simple marriage registration and then a modest celebration with friends. She wasn't thrilled with all the fuss. Who wants to feel obligated for the rest of their life? But since her mother-in-law had decided on it, there was no point in arguing. She was also not excited about the idea of living in the same house as her mother-in-law. She even tried to dissuade her then fiancé, trying to convince him that it wasn't the norm anymore. People lived separately these days. But Clark refused to discuss the matter. What, do you want to move from one rental apartment to another? That's foolish. My mom and I have a big house. There's plenty of room for everyone, more than enough. We can't just leave her alone. Think about it. Oh, this doesn't seem like it's going to go well, the girl doubted. Don't be silly. She won't like it if we move to who knows where, and I don't understand why you're doubting. To me, it seems like Mom treats you wonderfully. Better than she treats me, even. She always dreamed of having a daughter. Why don't you become that for her? By the way, she often spends whole days away on business trips. So, you'll manage. Firstly, because her fiancé's arguments were very logical and convincing, and she had no counter-arguments. Secondly, his words about Wendy likely wanting to see a daughter in her future daughter-in-law had an effect. Yes, maybe Wendy didn't always show her affection for Alice clearly. But they weren't living together yet. If they were willing to live as a family, why not? After all, Alice dreamed of having a good, loving family and a caring mother. Growing up with parents who, at best, were indifferent to her made her yearn for that. Additionally, having loved to drink during her teenage years, Alice even began to doubt whether she was truly the daughter of her parents. Too many hints suggested otherwise: physical differences, their relationship, and some drunken remarks made by her parents seemed suspicious. But she didn't dare to ask her parents directly and soon began to think about leaving the home where she clearly felt like an outsider. Alice did quite well in school, but due to financial problems, she couldn't continue her education. So, she was happy to find work as a waitress. The job allowed her to rent a room and move out of her parents' house, and then she met Clark. This gave her hope for a real family. After all, they loved each other, and Wendy had started to treat her decently, though maybe not yet like a daughter. But then again, she wasn't really her mother. Moreover, being a businesswoman, Wendy was too busy. Alice moved into the wealthy house. At first, everything was even quite good, you could say, great. Alice was happy, she and Clark loved each other. What more could she wish for? Even her mother-in-law's behavior didn't raise many questions. No, they didn't become as close as a mother and daughter, but there were no major complaints. From the start, it wasn't just a lack of love. Wendy simply didn't respect her. Not a day went by without a reminder that Alice should be grateful for the happiness Clark had given her. In the early days, while showing Alice around the house and explaining what was what, Wendy kept saying, "Well, did you imagine you'd be living like this? It probably seems like a fairy tale after the dump you came from. How do you know how I lived before?" Alice thought with frustration, though she couldn't deny the truth in Wendy's words. Yes, she had lived in a dump. Yes, this house was indeed a fairy tale for her. But why did Wendy show her everything as if Alice had come here not as the wife of the owner, practically the mistress of the house, but as a hired housekeeper? Wendy explained how and why to take care of things, what could be touched, and what should be avoided. She went into detail about the cost and the value of items. This porcelain collection is very expensive and antique, so you need to be extra careful. Please, don't break a single dish, or anything else for that matter. If you dust it, be very careful." After such remarks, Alice felt like smashing the entire collection on the floor with one sweep. Why does she tell me all this if she doesn't trust me? Please, just clean the porcelain yourself, I don't need it, she thought. It felt like she was being treated as a housekeeper. Wendy had an elderly Aunt Molly who had known the family for a long time. She had even been Clark's nanny. She didn't live in the house constantly but came several times a week to clean and cook. Wendy went out of her way to show her affection for this woman. Although Alice saw through all the pretense. What love! She probably despised Aunt Molly. The elderly housekeeper could feel this too and openly shared her thoughts with Alice. Oh, she puts on a soft facade. But she's really just a snake, the girl thought, slightly surprised. I think she's actually a decent wife. Who says she's not decent? It's not that she's bad, but she just thinks too highly of herself and doesn't see anyone else. You're probably hoping that, in terms of family connections, you're still the bride, aren't you? No, don't hold out hope. I'm family too, a cousin. But I'll tell you, with family like that, one doesn't need enemies. Alice herself understood that her mother-in-law wasn't an ideal example of a relationship. Still, she didn't want to think badly. And she didn't, as she was happy, and how could Wendy possibly interfere with that? Especially since she wasn't trying to. In fact, she wasn't trying at all, for example, to drive Alice out of the house or make the bride's life unbearable. At least, not every step of the way. Got it, out of grace, huh? You're lucky, she said over and over. Clark had plenty of girls, but he married you. And so? Is that love? Well, yes, love, but on the other hand, there's also a bit of calculation involved. You know, wealthy men sometimes like to be with girls from lower social classes. It elevates them. Moreover, it's also nice to feel gratitude. After all, you should be grateful to Clark for taking you so seriously. I'm grateful that he loves me, but as for the seriousness of it, I don't know, Alice once replied. And about social strata and wealth, I can work and support myself too, my dear, Wendy laughed then. You'd have to work for 100 years to support even a part of such a level. Besides, it would be easier if you just quit. I'm even embarrassed to tell anyone that my daughter-in-law runs around with a tray like some kind of servant. Yes, both Alice's husband and his mother insisted on her quitting even before the wedding. Why do you need to work? You'll be provided for, they both said in unison. But Alice didn't want to quit. Work gave her independence. Besides, with her salary, she could at least help her parents a bit. Yes, she didn't abandon them, although there wasn't much love between them. And after she left home at 18 and started an independent life, she didn't think about them very often. And they never called her or asked for anything either. But still, once a month she would visit, leaving a small amount of money, though she knew full well that it would likely be spent immediately on alcohol. To avoid this, sometimes she would do otherwise, pay their rent or buy groceries. Alice, of course, didn't hide these visits to her parents from her new relatives. Her husband and mother-in-law weren't against it, though they were surprised by her kindness, slightly laughing at the girl. It was clear that without working, she could hardly afford it on her own. They gave her money for these visits, considering them completely unnecessary. In fact, they didn't give her much of anything. That's why Alice wasn't planning to quit, believing that every woman should have her own money, no matter who her husband was. However, quite soon, she realized that Clark was completely dependent on his mother. Despite having an education, a profession, and even holding a position at Wendy's company, it seemed that he was of little use. He was simply receiving a salary for being the son at work. By the way, people were also surprised that Alice, having married a wealthy man, continued to work. As if your husband can't support you, some said. And if someone didn't say it outright, they surely thought it. Even Stella dared to openly mock the happiest one. If I had such a husband, I wouldn't even think of working, especially as a waitress. Can't they find a better position? And what's wrong with our work? Alice replied. I like it, and there's nothing wrong with it. Well, no one is saying it's bad. For me, and for someone like you used to be, it might be a dream job. But now you're married to someone important, and his mother's farm even said so. They should have made you a secretary or something. At least you'd be walking around in a suit, shuffling papers. Running around with a tray. I'll think about it, Alice replied, not liking these conversations. Mainly because she herself occasionally thought about something similar. When she got married, she secretly hoped for new opportunities. Not in the sense of living better off, but in the sense of being able to, for example, go back to school. She even talked to Clark about the possibility of applying somewhere, but met with complete misunderstanding. What schooling? Her husband said with a smirk. Why? Don't you have enough knowledge? Look at Mom's library, pick any book and read. If you want to be enlightened so much, you're jumping from one extreme to another. First you want to work, then you want to study, just to avoid being at home. But Clark, I'm fine at home, but I still want to do something. You are doing something, you're working, and no one is stopping you. All this schooling is unnecessary. Alice wasn't particularly skilled at arguing or insisting on her own way, so she agreed with her husband's opinions. It seemed pointless to argue. In general, the first year of their life together was more or less happy, but then a certain cooling-off period began, particularly on the part of her husband. She started to have suspicions about his fidelity. It was hard not to suspect someone who came home whenever he wanted, sometimes not even spending the night, making up strange excuses. However, Clark didn't bother much with explanations. Where I was, he replied casually. Stop asking such stupid questions. Do I not have the right to go out? After all, it's very insulting that you ask such questions. But, Clark, as your wife. We're together. I'm your wife, not just someone on the side. I don't expect you to account for every step you take, but if you're not spending the night at home. Oh, please, stop. I don't miss nights that often. Besides, I've told you. Sometimes you need to relax, meet friends. You can't just be free and not call me. So if I couldn't call, then I didn't. You disappoint me when you act this way. I don't think families behave like that. Oh, you know so much about how families should be. In your family, probably, things were different, he said, and such words upset her greatly, leading to arguments that, of course, the mother-in-law was aware of. Your needs don't necessarily mean infidelity, partying, and all the other things you fear, she told the bride. Maybe he really met with friends, taking a break from the family. He might even want to take a break from me and get a divorce. And divorce, the girl blurted out, frightened by her own words. The mother-in-law, however, was not scared and again expressed her displeasure. Think about what you're saying, Alice. Divorce? You married, you live together until the end. There will be no divorces, don't even talk about it. If you want, live happily. I don't think you'll live more peacefully from where Clark picked you up. And indeed, that was true. Sometimes Alice was so upset by such an attitude that she seriously thought about leaving her husband. But the problem was, she had nowhere to go. Moreover, she loved Clark and, when talking about divorce, she wanted to hear not the words Wendy spoke. The girl had hoped that Clark would be scared, embrace her, apologize, and promise not to do it again. But that didn't happen. He continued to live as his mother wanted, clearly indulging and sometimes even covering up his absences. Clark is a business person. I sent him on business, she would tell Alice. He can't call from there. Alice knew that no matter what business her husband claimed to be on, he was likely out having fun somewhere. Yes, she didn't like it, but there was nothing she could do about it. She endured his escapades and loneliness, as well as the small but painful jabs from his friends. But every patience has its limits. Therefore, after yet another particularly brazen act by her husband, she came to work today with a marriage certificate and a divorce application. She was very serious, planning to first visit a lawyer to learn about the details of the next steps. For now, she wanted to handle things differently by telling her mother-in-law that she was fed up with the situation in their home and had firmly decided to divorce. She found a convenient opportunity to inform Wendy in a rather original way. She placed the marriage certificate and divorce application in a menu folder and, when the two ladies signaled that they were ready to pay, approached them. She greeted them as politely as possible and placed the folder in front of her mother-in-law. Wendy, opening it, saw what was inside and stared at her daughter-in-law in bewilderment. Alice turned and went to the changing room. "Girls, I'm leaving early today," she told her colleagues, adding, "Tell the manager later that I'm not feeling well," or something like that. "I need to pack up and get away as soon as possible. Mia, will you take me in for a while, and then I'll rent an apartment?" "Yes, of course." "Stay as long as you need," her friend agreed, somewhat taken aback by her determination. Music played for a long time, Stella remarked bitterly. "It's true what they say, don't sit in someone else's sled." But Alice was no longer bothered by such comments. She had firmly decided to divorce her husband and let them say whatever they wanted. Another waitress burst into the changing room. "There's a customer, the one you, Alice, served. She's asking for you. She says, call Alice." "What happened with her?" "Nothing special," Alice replied. "Tell her I don't want to talk to her and that I've already left. Let her file a complaint if she doesn't like it. The administrator and director won't like it. Deal with your own issues however you want, but this is still work." Stella said, but Alice was no longer listening. She was hurrying home. Indeed, she didn't want to talk to Clark anymore, let alone Wendy. It was better to pack up and leave right away. The divorce was inevitable, nothing could change that now. At home, no one was there except Aunt Molly, who was busy in the kitchen and surprised by Alice's early return. She went into Alice's room and noticed she was packing her things. What, planning to run away? She wondered. "Give me a break, Aunt Molly, I'm tired of everything here." "Well, you see the kind of treatment I've been getting. I just can't take it anymore," the girl replied. "Well, that's right, the housekeeper approved her decision. I often think of quitting this job myself, but I've gotten used to it. And you can't live on one pension. But you're young, don't ruin your life too soon." Alice said a warm goodbye to the elderly housekeeper and went to her friend's place until she could find an apartment. She needed somewhere to keep her things. Mia gave her a key to her place. Arriving at the unfamiliar location, Alice cried bitterly. Only in solitude could she let her emotions out. It was still painful for her that their family life had ended, and ended so abruptly. Meanwhile, the phone rang every 5 minutes. Alice ignored the calls, not understanding what they wanted from her. It seemed clear enough already. Yes, she was grateful to her mother-in-law and her husband, but the burden of gratitude proved too heavy to bear. Couldn't they understand that she no longer wanted anything to do with them? She thought. However, she did read a message that came a little while later from Wendy. Alice, come home for a bit. I've called the notary. We need to discuss something. Alice only smiled. I wonder what about? What could she have to discuss with a notary? She wasn't planning on dividing anything. She and Clark hadn't had any children. So it's just the divorce process, which is quite straightforward. They lived together for a year and then separated. Nothing special. However, after a while, another message arrived, again from her mother-in-law. Alice, I've decided to pass on part of my business to you, but you will only receive it if you keep the family together. Alice was even amused. Her mother-in-law was willing to offer her business just to make her stay with Clark. What strange affection for me. And in general, I wonder why she needs all this. Her son will surely not stay single for long. He'll find another fool. Let her give away her business or whatever else she wants, but what am I supposed to do with it if I don't understand anything about it? Alice did reply to this message. Thanks, but I don't need anything from you, especially not the business. The divorce will still happen. You might regret it later. And don't doubt that I will regret it, thought Alice. But she didn't reply further. What could she possibly say to her mother-in-law? Should she threaten her? She had no real stake in their affairs and nothing to lose. As for regretting it, well, so be it. She will regret it and then move on. After all, life doesn't end after a divorce and a failed marriage. She was confident she had a way to influence her mother-in-law and decided to approach it from a different angle. She contacted the restaurant manager, without going into details, but stating that she wanted to punish one of the waitresses. When the manager learned who it was, he was surprised. But she doesn't seem to deserve punishment. She works well, one of the best employees. Yes, but firing her is a small matter. She denied me something much greater. She disagreed with Wendy. You need to fire her, and not just any way, but with a black mark. Sorry, but that would be entirely unfair. The surprised manager noted, it's not about fairness right now. For fulfilling my request, I'm offering you a very generous reward, and she mentioned a sum that immediately made the director reconsider his decision. Yes, Alice works very well, there are no complaints. But finding a waitress is not that difficult, while such a sum is unlikely to be offered again. It's a pity for the girl, but apparently, she really did something to upset Wendy if she's parting with money so easily. And he agreed. Alice understood that her mother-in-law could create quite a few problems for her if she wanted. But what happened was beyond her expectations. The next day, it was reported that a theft had occurred at the restaurant, and Alice was accused of it. The girl was in shock and couldn't prove her innocence. The manager, avoiding eye contact, said he couldn't do anything and that she had to leave. So, Alice was left without a job. In the evening, she cried and told Mia. I'm sure it was my mother-in-law. I didn't take anything. But you know that. Mia, I have no doubt that you're not involved. Don't get too down, you'll find another job. For now, stay with me. I'm not throwing you out. I know you're not throwing me out, but I don't understand, Mia, what does she want from me? Think about it, she wasn't happy when Clark and I decided to get married. And now she's suddenly willing to give away part of her business just for me to come back. What's this all about? Well, it's clear what it's about, her friend thought. She's worried about her son. Now that he's married, she's probably holding back a bit. But once he's divorced, he'll go completely off the rails. So, he's holding back as much as he can. It's not just that Alice refuses, she's not offering anything in return. She offers her business because she knows you won't take it. Why would you want it? Everything will stay the same, and you'll be with Clark. She just wants someone to take care of him. That's why your mother-in-law doesn't want you to leave. She wants you to suffer because of him. Clark was indeed upset when he found out that his wife wanted a divorce. He already had a mistress who would be happy to become his wife. He was also not averse to marrying her. But Alice? Well, if she decided to leave, he wouldn't force her to stay. However, his mother insisted that he should hold on to her by any means necessary, even if it meant using force. No divorce. Listen, Clark, I didn't expect that this waitress of yours would suddenly be in the middle of things. Why did you two have a falling out? We didn't have a falling out over anything. You know perfectly well. She didn't like it that I wasn't home at night, or something else, Clark said, confused. You have no conscience. Wendy was arguing, so now you have to get her back however you can. Throw yourself at her feet if you have to, promise her the Taj Mahal, but make sure she comes back. Mom, I don't understand what the issue is, Clark said, puzzled. Why do you need her so much? That's none of your business. Do as I say, his mother demanded. Wow, it's none of your business. Actually, this is my life, and it concerns me first and foremost, Dmitri said firmly. And I have nothing to worry about. I'll marry someone else tomorrow if I want to, he exclaimed. No divorces of any kind. Wendy shouted. And no marrying anyone else. Do you understand that this is about reputation? I'm not burning with it and suddenly there's such a scandal, my son is divorced. Mom, I'm sorry, but what century are we living in? Clark replied. Divorce is a trifle these days. Nobody cares about it. Everyone divorces 10 times, and it doesn't damage anyone's reputation. You will suffer now. Find your wife, apologize, and restore your personal life only with her. I don't mind if you have 100 mistresses. But you must marry and live only with her. Remember that. Obeying his mother, Dmitri called Alice. She answered and said that she wasn't planning to come back and that they would get divorced anyway. Well, what an idiot, was all he replied, hanging up the phone. He knew that he was in for an unpleasant conversation with his mother, but there was nothing he could do. Stubborn as a mule, you're even worse than any mule, Wendy fumed. You can't even carry out the simplest task. I have to do everything for you, an adult person. Meanwhile, Alice had no thoughts of returning. She was looking for work and, day by day, it became clearer that her reputation in town was already tarnished. After receiving several rejections, she decided that she needed to find any kind of income. Since the restaurant was off limits, she decided to try her luck in another field. However, the only job she could find was handing out free newspapers on the street. Of course, it was not the most prestigious job, and the salary was not enough to live comfortably. But it was something to start with. She chose a location far from her previous affluent home, not wanting to accidentally run into her husband or mother-in-law. So, she began handing out newspapers at the subway station from early morning until noon. Yes, the job was dreary, not the most pleasant, and low-paying, but it was something. The only thing that varied her workday was watching people. Almost on her first shift, she noticed a small, unkempt boy of about 8 years old who was begging. Despite his scruffy appearance, he was very polite. He didn't have money even for food. It was sad for her to see this little boy, and she immediately thought of her own impoverished childhood. No, she never had to beg on the streets, but it seemed this child's situation was even worse. During her next shift, she couldn't hold back and called the boy over to her. "Hi, where do you live?" she asked. "Nearby," the boy replied. "Do you have a mother?" she asked. "No, I live only with my dad." "Then why are you asking for money? Doesn't your dad give you any?" "No, he doesn't have much himself. I need money for my dad." This was already beyond belief. The boy was begging for his father. Was the father buying alcohol? And where were the child welfare services that should be monitoring such families? She was completely indifferent to how the child was begging. She offered, "I'll give you some money. Not much, just what I can spare since I don't have much myself. But let's do this, you take me to your home. I just want to meet your dad." "Why do you want to do that?" the boy wondered. "Well, I need to talk to him." "Don't be afraid, it's nothing bad. I won't tell him or you where I got the money from, okay? Just tell him that I'm helping you with the newspapers and that you're getting paid for it." "Okay," said the boy. And when she had handed out the last paper, they went together to little Rick's home. "Dad, I'm not alone," the boy shouted as he opened the apartment door. A man in an old wheelchair rolled out from the room. "Hello," Alice said, surprised. The man was clearly disabled and showed no signs of alcoholism. He wasn't unable to help his son due to bad habits, but simply because he couldn't. "Are you here for something?" he asked. "Would it be okay if I came in?" Alice asked. "Well, if it's not too unpleasant a conversation, I don't mind. Has something happened? Did Rick do something wrong?" "No, of course not. He hasn't done anything," Alice replied. "He's a very good boy, he helps me." She didn't want to talk to the man about the child, and he, apparently sensing this, said something to his son in response. "Well, the guest has arrived, we should entertain her. Go and put the kettle on, and we'll talk in the meantime," said the man, warmly welcoming Alice. The room the man led Alice into was clean and quite tidy, nothing like a shelter for alcoholics. "Please forgive me if it seems like I'm interfering," Alice began, "but I found it strange that a small boy was out on the street, and I know that you're disabled, and I thought that someone who doesn't keep track of their child. Well, I don't drink and I don't mind that he goes out sometimes to play. I can't accompany him in a wheelchair, as you can see, it could collapse at any moment. I move around the house, my spine," she nodded at a portrait of a young woman hanging on the wall. "His wife passed away. And I survived," the man continued. "Unfortunately, I sometimes think that Rick would be better off in an orphanage." "Don't say that. He loves you very much and is a good, well-mannered boy," Alice said. "Do you receive any treatment? People are recovering from various injuries nowadays. I would undergo rehabilitation, but I need surgery. It costs a lot of money, which I obviously don't have. What is my pension worth?" "Yes, after losing his mother, Rick. It's just enough to get by, and such luxuries," the man sighed. Alice sympathized with him and, after drinking tea with the cheapest cookies at the guest's house, went home, swallowing her tears. She felt ashamed to worry about her own troubles when there was real hardship, a child without a mother and a disabled father who could improve but whom she couldn't help. Meanwhile, in her former family, the quarrels continued. Wendy was constantly nagging her son, demanding that he bring Alice back. "Mom, what can I say? She doesn't even want to talk to me," Clark defended himself. "What kind of man are you? Can't you stand up for a woman? You need to bring her back, and be polite about it." Promise her something, make amends. Your future depends on this. How don't you understand? Clark felt that his mother probably knew something that could really affect their well-being, so he regularly called Alice. However, when he realized that his words had no effect on her, she simply blocked him. Eventually, realizing that she wouldn't get any results from her son, the mother-in-law got angry. You can't do anything on your own, you are putting everything on me. Fine, I'll figure something out myself. She'll come crawling back, just wait and see. She decided to find out everything about Alice's current life to try to influence her in some way. Alice herself was unaware of her former relatives' plans. Rick and Dean's story deeply touched Alice, and she wanted to help them. After thinking it over, she recalled the power of advertising and decided to use this approach. After all, adults begging on the streets provoke both outrage and sympathy. But people don't know who he is and why he's asking for money. And Rick had secretly confided in her that he was saving up for his father's surgery. That dad could walk again? Of course, you won't get much that way. Alice made a small poster stating that the boy was collecting money for his disabled father's surgery. It included bank details and a description of Dean's illness, supported by medical reports. Alice hoped that this way she could raise a lot more money. She was very touched by the story of this unfortunate, disadvantaged family, and over time, while visiting Dean and Rick, she realized that she felt more than just sympathy for the boy's father. She liked him as a man. But she had another concern. The divorce was still not finalized. When she approached Clark about it, he raised a commotion. There would be no divorce, you must return to me, and we will be together. Can't you understand that? You won't succeed anyway. Why won't I succeed? Who can force me to live with you? Alice replied, not yet realizing that such a person actually existed, namely her former mother-in-law, Wendy. She was keeping an eye on the girl, trying to find out where and how she was living now, and had already made quite a bit of progress in her investigations. Of course, Alice knew nothing about this and couldn't even begin to understand what her mother-in-law wanted from her. She just wanted to finalize the divorce as quickly as possible, believing that it would put an end to all relations with Clark and his mother. But her husband shifted from pleading to insults and then threats. You won't get any divorce. You'll have to put up with it. My mother has powerful connections, and it's best not to test them. Finally, Alice couldn't take it anymore. You're not giving a divorce? Fine. Let that stamp stay in your passport. You won't be able to marry anyone else. As for me, I don't need the divorce right now. Alice snapped, fed up with the constant arguments. She had other concerns now. She worried about Rick and his father, hoping to help these people. It must be said that with her poster, the boy was now raising more money, but even so, it was still not enough. It would take many years to save up for the surgery. However, Alice believed that something had to help. One day, an elderly couple, a man and a woman, approached her. They were completely unfamiliar, but immediately gave off a sense of sympathy and trust. They looked at her intently with an expression that Alice herself couldn't quite place. The stranger asked, "Are you the one collecting money with that boy?" "Yes," Alice replied. "Do you really know the man who needs the surgery?" Alice confirmed again. Then, the woman handed her a rather heavy envelope. Alice opened it. It appeared to contain a substantial amount of money. "But how is this possible?" she exclaimed. "This is a lot. Please take it. We really want the man to recover, and we hope the boy won't have to beg on the street anymore," said the woman as they turned and quickly left. Alice called Rick and told him they needed to go home immediately. "Something happened?" the boy asked anxiously. "This is a good thing." I hope the happiest thing in our lives. Let's go home quickly." Without explaining anything, she took out the envelope, counted the money, and looked at Dean. It seemed there was enough for the surgery and even rehabilitation. "Do you have a phone number or some information about the clinic where all this is done?" "Well, yes, I have some details somewhere," Dean said, somewhat flustered. "Are you sure you want to give the money to us?" "Of course, they gave money for the surgery, not for anything else," Alice replied and briefly explained what had happened. "Who are these people? Why did they decide to help?" "I don't know, maybe we'll find out later," Alice said. "But for now, we need to focus on your health. I don't think we can delay any longer." They called the hospital, and soon Dean began to prepare for the surgery. Alice was happy, but she was also troubled by the elderly couple. Who were they? Why did they look at her like that? Why did she feel such warm emotions from them? There were no answers, and they didn't appear again. With these thoughts, both happy and troubling, she nearly forgot about her former relatives. But they were still very much present. Of course, they were planning to bring Alice back, and this was driven by the fact that she knew who the people were that had given the money. They had only recently returned to the country and had already met with their biological daughter. Alice knew that this was a very old story. Once, when they were young and very wealthy businessmen, they had become embroiled in a complex battle with competitors. They were already very rich at the time, but still young and inexperienced. Realizing that they couldn't win this war and that not only they but also their tiny daughter could suffer, they decided to flee illegally to a European country. It was better to ensure their daughter's safety rather than leave her in the care of distant relatives, promising to send money for her support and to take her back at the first opportunity. After 20 years, the opportunity finally arose. They were able to send money for a while, but then they began to face difficulties themselves. They couldn't find their daughter in their hometown. They found the relatives they had left Alice with, but they were very angry for having been deceived. The money stopped coming, and they had to take care of the child. "So where is she now?" the parents asked. "How should we know?" "She got married." "To whom? We don't know. We didn't attend the wedding, no one came. She used to visit us, but then she disappeared completely. So you'll have to search for her yourselves. Wherever you want. We have no addresses or phone numbers." With great difficulty, the elderly couple finally managed to find Alice. But how to admit to her that they were her parents? The girl might never forgive them for abandoning her, so they had given her up for adoption. It turned out that Wendy knew Alice's birth secret, which was why she had no objections to the marriage with Rick. And given this, she was so determined to get Alice back, as the girl could potentially become a wealthy heiress. She would be incredibly wealthy, far wealthier than Wendy herself. Clark would turn out to be such a useless husband that his wife would run away from him. However, Wendy, after reclaiming Alice, decided to act through the boy. One day, Rick didn't come home. Alice was horrified. Where could he be? There were no messages about, say, a ransom. And what kind of ransom could there be? She didn't think that the kidnapping of the child could have been orchestrated by her former mother-in-law for the purpose of blackmail. She tried to find Rick on her own and went to the police, but they refused to speak with her. "And who are you?" they asked her. "The boy, when he disappeared the day before yesterday." "The child, as you said, leads quite a free lifestyle." "Well, he'll run around and come back. You see, his father is in the hospital. I don't know what to tell him about this." "Well, just tell him you missed it. I don't understand what you want from us." But before the police could act, Alice's biological parents decided to confess who they were and why they had given her the money. They approached her again on the street and told her the story of their lives. They were seriously afraid that she would be upset with them and not want to talk, but no. Alice cried. She had suspected that those she called her parents were not actually her biological parents. "Did you have a hard time living with them?" her biological mother, Cindy, asked through tears. "Yes, sometimes," Alice replied. "But I survived, grew up, for Rick's sake." "Well, yes, they drank. I even loved them, to be honest, because there was no one else to love. I didn't know anything about you. But I'm glad to know now and grateful to you for giving us the money. It was enough to get Dean into a clinic, and I think he will recover. The surgery was successful." She told them about Rick's disappearance and that the police were refusing to take active measures. "Well then," decisively, said Matthew, "I'll find the boy. I'll start right now. Not by myself, of course. I'll hire private detectives. They won't wait for the child to show up on his own, from who knows where and in who knows what condition. Thank you so much. You can't even imagine what you've done for me." His father doesn't know yet that Rick is missing. "I'm afraid to tell him." The private detective hired by Matthew succeeded in his task. He managed to find the boy alive and well. Rick had been taken out of town and kept in an empty house. The child was not physically harmed, but he was emotionally distressed, worried about his father and Alice. Moreover, his free-spirited nature rebelled against being kept locked up somewhere. He tried to escape, and he was guarded, as Wendy needed him. She was already planning to inform Alice that Rick was with her, but only if Alice came back to Clark. This plan might have worked, but Rick was found by the detective first. "Rick," Alice cried. "What happened? Who took you and kept you in that house?" "You know, Alice," Rick began, "I'll tell you later. You can't imagine how worried I was about you." "I can imagine. I was very worried too, thinking that if I was kidnapped, something bad might happen to you as well. And how is Dad now?" "We'll go to the hospital to see him." "Of course, we will. He misses you a lot. I didn't tell him you were kidnapped to avoid upsetting him. I was sure you would be found, and now you're with me. I'm so happy." "I'm happy too." Alice's parents were also happy. They had found their daughter and established a good relationship with her. They also helped her resolve some issues that she wouldn't have managed without them. Alice already knew that her biological parents lived in Europe and were quite well off. They said it would be better to visit them all together and then see how things went. "I can't leave right now. I need to sort out some issues and, most importantly, wait for Dean to come back from the clinic. He is undergoing rehabilitation, and I hope he will be healthy soon. Indeed, the main thing is to punish those responsible for Rick's kidnapping. It's a very serious crime and must not go unpunished," Matthew said firmly. "Of course, Rick won't refuse to give testimony, and I have an idea of who did this. I think Wendy and her son will have to answer for their actions." And that's exactly what happened. Everyone involved in the kidnapping received their due punishment. Dean was discharged from the clinic completely healthy, and soon Alice married him and adopted his son. Now she had a loving husband, a son, and parents who no longer planned to leave her.